being like, wait, this is pushing the limits from what's possible. And
ignorance helps you to a certain extent. Not knowing the challenges that you're about to face helps you face those challenges.
What gives Ethereum economic security from
to argue whether it's going to be Solana or Phantom seems kind of like, or some other blockchain, is too random.
And we're live. Today I have the unique pleasure of doing a podcast with James Hunsaker, the co-founder of Monad Labs. Monad has raised, I believe, 17 million.
Yeah,
19 million to date, which they just recently released that information a week ago. And Monad is building an EVM compatible, scalable blockchain infrastructure that can do up to 10,000 transactions per second.
Yeah, we're targeting 10, so 10 will be our minimum. I'm hoping for obviously a lot more.
Cool. One of the things I hold Monad close to my heart because I feel like I kind of discovered James. We were in New York at Consensus, right? I think it was.
I'm not sure what conference was going on.
No, you know what it was for? No, it was for
our Pith party.
It was a Pith party. It was a Pith party. And I just went to your table and we just started talking. This is while you were still at Jump. James was also the lead engineer building Pith at Jump. At the time, I don't know, we just started connecting in like the most random of places. Yeah, this was at this point, let's see, 2 years ago about?
This would have been summer of 2021.
Yeah, okay, so just about 18 months. And yeah, we just started kicking it off. And I remember like I sensed your hustle, right? I hold a little bit of pride in like discovering people early. Some of my friends have even gone to call me like the billionaire whisperer, which I think is a bit of a stretch. I don't know. I just like it. Like I can sense, let me put it this way. In a room full of crypto OGs and a lot of crypto newbies, I think I have the unique ability to like target and find like who I think is the most important or interesting person in the room. And we ended up talking for a while that night. And I just remember early on, you were like, dude, I have this idea that I want to like build something, but I don't know how to like do any of this venture capital raising thing, right? Like you had no exposure to entrepreneurship, right? Like the venture capital world.
Nothing yet.
So I'm kind of imagining that this podcast could be very motivational for people in the Midwest who are pretty high achievers, but don't know how to start their own company and kind of what's required to do that. So how did that journey begin? Maybe I'd even ask for your own experiences in life. Is this the first time you wanted to start a company? Because if you don't mind sharing, you're what, in your mid, how old are you?
40.
45.
Yeah.
So mid 40s. Is this the first time that you've kind of had the idea of creating your own startup?
It's not. Startup, yes, probably. I had this wild idea when I was a teenager that I actually wanted to buy Commodore, the company. Do you remember Commodore 64?
I don't.
Okay. So this is an old computer. It would even use like audio tape, like the magnetic audio tape is like a way of storing information.
Huh.
And they had created this computer called Amiga, AMIGA. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
So Commodore was just kind of like a basic computer. It was very bulky and, like the keyboard wasn't good. But a lot of my friends had them. I never had one. And then they kind of created this Amiga computer, which was revolutionary in the terms of its graphics and audio. You could edit videos, and I actually don't know that much about it because I never had an Amiga either. But it was a company like many companies of that era that just kind of ran into the ground. Like Atari and all these companies, like these were just like had a lot of momentum at one time, and through various neglect of the founders and various bad business decisions, they just kind of like fell apart. And then you've seen this recently, last 10 years, like Sun Microsystems used to be a big company. It was bought by Oracle, so like all these companies, like all these like really super innovative tech companies, for some reason always end up on the garage sale like table for somebody to buy pennies like on the dollar. So that's kind of another topic to discuss some other time. But I had this idea that I wanted to buy Commodore as a teenager, which was just nuts because
How old are you? 16?
Yeah, something like that. Like I was in high school and I went and I found this lawyer that was like a business lawyer in Des Moines, Iowa. And I met with him and he of course strongly discouraged me from even attempting this, but he wasn't rude or condescending or anything about it. It's just like, your chances of probability are pretty low. We can pursue this, but it's going to cost so many hundreds of dollars per hour and blah blah. And I didn't have any money, and my family didn't have from any wealthy sort of background, so the chance of pulling off. But I was drawn to like a company that was really innovative and could produce like super innovative things, but was being run poorly as a business. There's just like I said, many stories like this. Since then, yeah, that was probably like mid 90s. I didn't even touch like entrepreneurism or business again until 10 years later. I worked for a startup, technology startup, for like a year and a half or something like that. And then that would have been like 2005. So then it's been another, 15 years and I'm back at it. So I've had interest, but there's been big gaps in between of just regular sort of grinding at a regular job sort of thing.
I hear you, man. That's fascinating. Let's go back to the 16-year-old James, right? Were you technical yet at that point? I know you said you didn't have one of those computers yet, but like, was this your A, what attracted you to the business in general? And B, how are you able to evaluate that it wasn't being managed properly from a business perspective? Because that's a lot of insight for a 16-year-old.
I was technical. So I started, I'll say programming in quotes, like in third grade. Well, that's when, I had like, well, my mom was a teacher, so she always had like Apple IIs and Apple Macs to play on at her school. And then at my school, we had mostly Apple IIs. So, and back then there were magazines that you could buy. Well, I usually just check them out at the library. And in the magazine, somebody had written code and they put it in the magazine and you would type it in from the magazine and build it on your Apple II, and then you could play a game or something. The game that stands out to me was like a clown that was on a skateboard and he would skate back and forth on the screen and balloons would be falling from the sky. And if he could catch them, that was like he was earning points basically. And if he missed the balloon hit the ground, it would pop and he would lose points. So that was like one of the games that I recall that I typed in. So that's not really programming, like typing in somebody else's program, but it still requires like technical effort. Like you're typing it in, you're compiling, you're building, you're checking it that it runs. Like there's still a lot of stuff there for like a 9 or 10-year-old. Yeah, I kind of progressed. So, like I had people try to give me Pascal books and different sorts of things, and I didn't really get interested. So I think like my early actually programming was basic. And then when I got into high school, I finally got like an IBM laptop, and it didn't have X Windows driver. So I started coding in C, writing an X Windows driver, C in assembly. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. Like it was all just trial and error. Just punch the keys and they would either work or not work. And I don't know if you're familiar with like graphics, but it's like, okay, draw a square, draw a circle, draw a line, different colors, fill them in, gradients, all these sorts of. So stuff that like appears in your GUI or your application is all these, at least used to be all these like primitive sort of renderings, and then you would just composite all those together and you would get like a graphics, like an interface window. So I pounded on that. I sat on a sleeping bag in my room, surrounded by dirty dishes, didn't shower for a week, just pounding. And I had some of that basic stuff working, all the, like I said, square, circle, lines, different colors, gradients, and all that stuff. But it still wasn't enough to actually like run X Windows. So I can't recall what I did then. I think I probably just switched to like Microsoft Windows at that time. But I was trying to get Linux to work. So I was, by that time I was pretty technical. I didn't know that much about Commodore, the company, except for what I would read in like magazines and newspapers and stuff. There was no internet back then. It was like Prodigy, CompuServe, BBSs that you would dial into, super slow. Back then, I think people don't realize how easy it is to get information. Like you would have to go to the library and get like Dun and Bradstreet. Like they would just have volumes and volumes of Dun and Bradstreet, which are like business profiles, business mag. You couldn't find this stuff, right? And if you tried to buy it, I used to buy some like financial papers and stuff on like CompuServe. It was just ridiculously expensive, like $30 per document, which is a lot of money in like 1990s. And I would rack up like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, charges that my mom would be very unhappy with services. But to answer your question, I was somewhat technical. I didn't know very much compared to what I know now. I was technical enough to recognize like innovation. That's the summary. Like I could tell that something was innovative compared to everything else. And I think a lot of people still struggle with that. Like, it's hard to tell, like, is this truly unique? Is there something that's like innovative here? Like, to me, like ZK proof stuff that's innovative. Like, there's actually math and stuff that's going on there that's new and pushing the boundaries of mathematics, computer science, that sort of stuff. Now, granted, like, even ZK stuff now is several years old, right? Like Zcash and all these other things have been around for a while. So, but and then you see in like crypto space, you see other things, and you're like, oh, that's not, it may they're marketing it as if they invented something, but it's not really, like, it's not necessarily innovative. Like, that concept's been around for maybe decades, but this is kind of like a tech thing as well.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So you had the ability to kind of realize, was it something that you'd call it your instinct? That's something you got like a dopamine rush when you just heard of something being possible, or was it actually based off of some technical understanding of being like, wait, this is pushing the limits from what's possible, and this could have major implications? Like, when you're that young, what's drawing you towards the sun?
Yeah, it's like, well, it is somewhat knowledge. If you lived in some tribe in the jungle your entire life and you see a car, you're going to be like, wow, not knowing that there's literally hundreds of millions of cars in the world, right? So, like, yeah, you have to have some context or something to compare, some reference point to compare it against. So if you're not looking around and you're not like seeing what's around you, and you just look at one thing and you're like, oh wow, I'm really impressed, So I think that's what catches a lot of non-technical people when they're being sold like technical concepts, is they don't know, so they don't have the context. So if somebody portrays in a certain way, then the person will be like, wow, that's really cool. Well, it's cool to you because you don't know that it's been around for 20 years and it's been in these 10 other products. Like, so yeah, you definitely have to have the context, and then it's a lot of intuition. It's just like, and sometimes you're wrong. Like, there's been times where I thought something was like really cool, and then I found out, oh shit, like, it's been around like 10 years. And it's been like these different products. So yeah, it's not 100%, but it's
Nothing is, very little. What gave you that business intuition to want to buy it? I mean, that's bold, right? Like, where did that come from?
I don't know. That's probably some like ego in there, where it's like, you always feel, this is like, I was a consultant for a while. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to point out what somebody else is doing wrong than it is to do it yourself. That's a whole other sort of topic. Like, as the consulting sort of businesses like Accenture and these sorts of places, like, they have a place in the world, but it's not a fair comparison to say, like, I came and sat with you for 3 weeks and I'm like, hey man, like, your business process, the way you're doing this, could be reformed. Like, they don't have the history. Like, there's an evolution of things. It got that way and they don't understand like all this stuff. So there's a luxury that consultants have. So the same sort of luxury that I had. I think you guys have great technology, but you're running your business poorly. Like, you should, like, strategically would do this and that.
I mean, I hear that. I agree with you. Maybe for someone in their mid-20s or early 20s, right? But like at 16, I mean, most people are like worried about more immature things like chasing girls and being popular, hanging out, whatever 16-year-olds worry about. Sorry for 16 and listening to this. I'm clearly outdated and don't know what problems you're dealing with now. But I know when I was 16, I wasn't thinking about buying companies. Yeah, I definitely had that ego in me of being like, okay, I can do better than this. So I get that consultant angle. What gave you the balls to actually pursue wanting to buy it out? Like, where did you get any encouragement from anyone, or was it just internal?
Yeah, it was purely internal. I even went through the process of like forming like a Delaware corporation at one point. This is all like when I'm young,
all right? On paper. You like filled out forms.
And they mail you stuff. And this is still when you like get the stamp that like creases the paper in a certain way.
Yeah. I have totally, man.
Like sort of like
emblem shows up in the back.
Yeah, like King of England sort of things. But and then within my family, because my family was all like school teachers, blue collar workers, this sort of thing. Yeah, what was the question?
No, just more about like what gave you that courage, right? To kind of like, nowadays, sure, like people are talking more about entrepreneurship, whether you're 16 or 20 or 30, it doesn't matter, right? Like, people are on TikTok and you can always find your crew and you can find ways to motivate yourself to become, to follow the path of entrepreneurship, right? When you're 16, that there's something that comes from that drive, right? Like, especially when you're in the Midwest, and I don't know how many people were starting up new companies back then. And so like, where did the idea come from to even buy it? And where did you get that motivation to push through when everyone in your family was kind of laughing at you?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of different things. First it's just like intuition. Like, people obviously started Like some guy started Commodore, so why can't I buy Commodore? This is sort of like that. Like if somebody else can do it, why, Steve Jobs started Apple, why can't I start it? I don't know if Steve Jobs is from the Midwest or whether he's from the West Coast or something, but people did it. So certainly it's possible. It's probably, yeah, just an underestimation, somewhat naive, just like underestimation of what's the work that's actually involved. Like, so, just optimist, and you're like, oh, it's not that hard. Like, I can pull this off, and not really knowing like everything that's involved. This is like big business stuff. There's lots of lawyers, investment bankers, and all this shit involved. It's like, you have no idea about that. So ignorance helps you to a certain extent. Not knowing the challenges that you're about to face helps you face those challenges, because if you actually understood like the daunting task that's in front of you, you'd probably turn and run away, go home and watch TV or something. So I think that's part of it. 80s was a great time in the US, right? Like big business, the corporate raiders, the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen. I feel like super fortunate to have grown up in the 80s. I just think it's just a time with, there's just so much energy. Like I felt in culture, the pop music and the business stuff. And there was just so much energy I feel. And yeah, like 90s was like tech. That's when Web 2 started coming out. You throw .com on the name, of your name. I don't know. It just didn't, to me, have the same energy of the 80s. And then I just felt like 2000s, 2010s probably decreasing energy. But I just feel like 1980s is kind of comparable like 1920s, right? Like people who think back to that era, it's always portrayed as like everything's going great and culture has so much energy and people are so happy and business deals are being done and people are making money and people are dancing and having fun and, like in the movies and all this sort of stuff. So I feel like probably the best 2 decades were like best 2 decades, at least in the last 100 years, 1920s and 1980s. So I just feel like very fortunate to have grown up in that. I'm a movie guy, so I watched a lot of movies. There's this Michael J. Fox one. I can't think of the name right now, but he's like he grew up on a farm in Kansas, and he goes to New York, and he runs into all these problems, like the job that he had lined up. The business is like going out of business. He's living in like a rat infested apartment. Nothing's working out for him. So he hates to do it, but he asks like an in-law uncle to work for his company. He's running like some big company. The guy puts him in the mail and he like hustles behind the scenes and he acts like he's an executive like part of the time. So he's like changing clothes in between his like blue mailroom outfit and his suit. And I don't know if you know this movie, but I'll send it to you later. It's just it's super inspiring. It's like a kid from Kansas comes to New York and he hustles, somewhat devious and somewhat doing all this stuff, but he's still smart. The hustle plus his intelligence, and he ends up at the end of the movie taking over the company. Yeah, some of it was from movies, and some of it was just general like naiveness and
Naivety. Dude, I hear that. Like one of my favorite quotes is entrepreneurs, high risk people generally end up in two places, either prison or starting their own companies, right? Like
Yeah.
that's true. So when you say that whole like, I forget the exact word you said earlier, but about like a little deceiving, I think is the word you said. Like that's par for the course, right? Were you a troublemaker in school, like with your mom being a teacher? I don't know if that made it a little tough, but
I was a troublemaker. First of all, like most of my high school, I didn't go. Like I would just stay home. They would be calling my parents, calling my grandparents, like, "Where's James?" They'd be like, "We don't know," because I could drive. At a certain point in Iowa, you can drive. So I think I was driving around like 15, something like that. So they would call me. I had a cell phone at that time, actually. I had one of the big brick, like it wasn't that big, but it was like 90% of the phone was the battery, because the battery technology sucked back then, right? They would call me and be like, "Where are you at?" And I would just like find guys that were like selling like old Sun computers, and I would drive. Like I'd wake up in the morning, everyone else went to school. I would like take a 3-hour road trip to go buy this Sun computer. And I didn't know anything about Sun or like the operating system or any of this stuff. This is like old classic, like Unix hardware. But I knew I wanted to play with it. Like I knew that much. I knew that there was something there that was interesting that I didn't know. And I wanted to learn. The only way to learn was like to put your hands on one. Easier later when I was in university, because when I was in university, they had all these machines. I could go play with them without buying them. But in this case, I like needed to buy it. So I just remember like one of the things that my family jokes about, one of these times is like I just up and left and went on this long road trip to buy the Sun computer.
Where'd you get the money for it?
I had regular jobs, like started out with paper routes, pizza restaurants. I was a busboy at like 14. This like Italian restaurant. It was like a mafia place, super sketchy, but yeah. And then I worked at a pizza restaurant making pizzas, I've done all the typical teenage stuff.
So you paid for it yourself. Like you were buying these computers.
Yeah.
So you drove 3 hours to get these computers and you're working on them. So I think the question was more around like just I'm just refocusing myself around troublemaking. So you were
Oh yeah. So I just didn't go to school, but I was pretty far ahead. Like I did very well in subjects I cared about. Algebra in eighth grade, which was a big thing back then. Now it's standard. Everybody does algebra in eighth grade these days. But I did algebra in eighth grade. I did geometry over the summer. I took freshman year off of math. And I did calculus like sophomore year. So I think like that kind of goes with. I always had the attitude even back then. I just actually thought of this. It's like the best way to learn something is just throw yourself into it, right? The thing that frustrates me about school is like it's the slow incremental progress. Like today I'm going to teach you addition. And then next week we're going to do subtraction. And next week we're going to do like associative property of addition. Like it's just very like slow, gradual. I think like the absolute most efficient way to learn something is just throw you right into it. Like so I basically used to do that to myself back then. It's like I said, I did algebra in eighth grade, I did geometry over the summer, and then I was in ninth grade, I didn't do anything. I had an algebra 2 textbook that I would browse through a little bit here and there, but I didn't take algebra 2. I didn't take pre-calc or trig or any of those things. And then sophomore year, I took AP Calc. And yeah, I went in there knowing way less than all. I was surrounded by seniors, and not only seniors, like the good seniors, like the honors students, right?
AP Calc in your sophomore year?
AP Calc sophomore year after having skipped a year of
Senior
math,
year.
right? So I didn't even do any math for the previous year. I took like a year off. Yeah, it was hard. Like it's throw yourself into that, but that's the best way to learn, And I didn't ace. I didn't get a 5. I got a 4. So like I didn't master the material that quickly. I did well enough that it's 4 and 5 is still a decent score. 4 is still a decent score on AP test. So, but yeah, I've always kind of done that. Like I think that is the best way to learn things. It's just to jump in. I don't read books anymore. I used to think that like reading programming books would like help me. And I realized very quickly that doesn't help you. Like just start programming. Like I said, when I was trying to make a X Windows driver, I was writing C code and assembly. I honestly didn't even know what C was. Like I was just pattern matching syntax that other people had written and like replicating it, and then either the compiler compiles it or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then I have to figure out like what it's doing, sort of thing. But it's like the AI stuff, right? Like it doesn't have semantic understanding. It's just like pattern matching, like replicating syntax. So,
Love that you're saying pattern matching and replicating syntax. I'm gonna write that down because like this is how I learned, man. Pattern. That's the best way that I learned, man. Like I'd always joke that it was through copying. I don't like when I was trying to learn theory. Okay, maybe I can like, force a bunch of theory in my brain in one night. But until I get to actually apply it, it didn't mean anything. I just forget about it. Like if the second that I do something else, right? But once I did pattern matching, I mean, yeah, sure, it's copying like a friend's homework assignment because it wasn't just like me sitting there and writing in these random, characters that I don't know what it means. It was like I would break down every line, right? What's actually happening here? Why am I doing this? Oh, cool. That's how it applies to the theory, right? And then like that's how I learned by doing, right?
mhm.
So I seriously like I that's where I did most of my learning. I hear you.
Like reciting back facts is not comprehension. It's not understanding, right? So like, if you take a chemistry test and it's like multiple choice and it's like, okay, well, how would you calculate, this number of moles in this or something like
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
If you can like cram for the test the night before, run in, check B is the answer, and walk out, and you basically haven't learned anything, right? So like
Exactly.
doing labs, actually calculating where there's like an outcome that's I guess binary, like it's successful or it's not successful. Education of doing is way more productive and efficient. It's like slow, incremental, reading books, taking quizzes, going to lecture, like just build something. I hope that parents do this for their kids as well. I'm trying to do it with my daughter. It's like, I just switched her to online school from in-person school because I just think in-person school is super inefficient. It's serving a number of functions besides education. And I want to take that like extra time. And I'm just telling her like, just write some code for Monad or something like that. Like just write. And she's like, well, I don't know how to write code. I didn't either. Like at some point, like, just start writing. You just start pounding on the keyboard. Eventually, you're going to figure it out.
Totally.
In a year, you're going to be amazed at what you know, and you're going to be in the top 10%, maybe not in a year, but the top some X% of people who have technology understanding or coding experiences.
I agree, man. I was gonna ask you that question too. One of my friends, David, he has two kids and he's homeschooling them. And he kind of similar to what you were just referring to in your own educational experience, that like these kids, they just find what they're interested in and they just dive deep into it, right? How do you manage that, man? Like, okay, so sorry, before I transition off of that, like, and they're doing great, right? They're like very passionate about what they're doing. They're excited by it. They're not held back by their teachers necessarily. They're not like yelled at school or anything. There could be some social implications to that, right? About like being about the importance of socialization and all. With that said, though, maybe that's even a whole conversation for another time. And maybe a plug for mental health there, to take care of yourself and find ways to, find your communities and tribes. What's that like for you to effectively homeschool your daughter, I guess?
Well, we're just starting. So, yeah, I mean, the schooling part, the credits, the grades, the GPA, the SAT score, like these are all just like checking boxes. I just honestly didn't care. Like, like, there's a system over here and people want me to play along, and I'm not going to play along. Like, that was my decision back then. So if I was interested in the class, if it was calculus, chemistry, physics, computer science, that sort of thing, if I was interested, I would have an A plus in it, especially like CS, because when I was taking those classes, well, those were more checking boxes because I already knew everything before I took the class in most cases. I'm not trying to like say I knew everything, but there were some cases like algorithms course where, okay, like big O notation, that's something you don't think about. You're just messing around coding. So, that was like something I had to learn. Some of the like mathematical logic, that's the stuff I had to learn. But like the basic, like first few programming, like Java programming or C++ programming, like that stuff I knew before I took the class. So there is value to those courses, but the problem with education is it's so diverse. And if you're already laser focused at a young age, you don't have time for that stuff. Like I'm trying to achieve a goal, and you're asking me to like spend 20 hours a week on this thing that's like American history is interesting. I like it. I like world history more, but those contribute to making me a well-rounded individual, but they don't contribute to the goal that I'm trying to achieve, right? So, and from that perspective,
How'd you get so goal oriented? Like, there's two things. There's also this like edge that you have to you, right? Hard work in a way. I'm thinking kind of like Larry Bird. I don't know if you're a basketball fan at all.
I know Larry Bird, but yeah, I was not a basketball.
So dude, Larry Bird, right? Coming back to it. He was like the hardest working NBA player. The reason I brought up the Larry Bird analogy, right, is his dad was a blue collar worker, and he would like often see his dad come home after working like random jobs to make ends meet. And his like foot would be swollen, right? And he would just like in the morning force his foot right back into that shoe, two times the size of his shoe, maybe not proportionally, but that's what it seemed like to him as a kid. He'd just go back to work. And he got that crazy work ethic from his dad. Larry Bird ended up he won like MVP 3 years in a row. He won it as a rookie. Like, he was kind of doing Michael Jordan-esque stuff before Jordan came. Where'd you get your work ethic from and your kind of commitment to achieving that goal?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of many things. Like you mentioned Midwest. I think Midwest people are just generally hard working, toiling through the day, getting through the day. Like it's just I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in the city of Midwest, but it's still like that culture is still sort of there. A certain level of seriousness, like Iowa, Minnesota. These are like Germany, and these sort of it's kind of like just a serious sort of culture, friendly sort of culture, but very serious still culturally that way. My mom's a very hard worker. My grandparents were very hard workers. They didn't have the ambition that I had. Like they never wanted to build a company or they never wanted to like make a change on the world. But for what they did, they worked extremely hard. Teachers are, as you probably know, are a ton of work, not much pay, never ends, right? Like doing grading at night, all that stuff. Being a teacher requires a lot of dedication, a lot of hard work. You want to be a good teacher. My grandparents were, they were like blue collar labor, that sort of thing, working in factories, working in different things. They were always super hardworking at work and at home, always maintaining the house, the grass. My grandfather always had like his lawn perfectly cut, right? Like took pride. So there's also aspects like taking pride. Like if you want it to look good, you want the result to be good, you're going to work harder. It's not like, oh, I'm going to work hard and just like point, some random thing. Direct your energy that way. It's like, oh, I want this, and I'm going to put in all the effort it takes to get that. So there's that. sort of like perfectionist sort of thing, like being rigorous about things. And I think that my family always kind of had that sort of thing as well. So I think I kind of see it that way. I don't know if there's a genetic component. I don't know how much is like learned versus genetic or whatever, but yeah, that just kind of, and then I think the ambition more probably came from my dad. Like I always view my dad as being like kind of a business guy, even though he was a guy wearing a suit and all that. I always thought that was kind of cool, important, right? People look at you making deals or something. So it's a combination of like hard work and then like that wanting to make a difference, sort of like in the world, and those two things kind of combined together, I guess.
That's cool. That's cool, man. I appreciate you opening up to that. And all the conversations we've had, I didn't know all this about the way you were raised. Is two questions. Is Hunsaker, is that a German last name?
Yeah, there's many variations of this in the U.S., like Hunsaker and Hunsaker and Hunsaker and all these, but they all derive from. I could be totally like they all derive from like this lake that's I think in between like Switzerland and Germany, so it's like in that area. It's something related to like Huns Valley or like the Tell of the Hun or something. I don't know. Yeah,
Cool.
there's like a lake, there's like a region where all these like Hunsaker, all that stuff comes from. It's like Swiss.
Cool. Germans are built differently, man. I lived with Germans for 5 years. That German mixed with Midwest is a lethal combination. You were also mentioning that you wanted to make a difference in the world, right? What was that? Like, what difference did you want to make in the world?
You know, some of that was social and some of that was just technological. Social, when I was younger, I always had all these different sorts of things. Like, I didn't understand why there were poor people. I didn't understand why people didn't have jobs, right? Like, this didn't make sense to me. I always thought, like, oh, there's a ton of shit to do. Like, why aren't people doing it? I'm talking like 10-year-old James here, right? Like, why? I look around and like, why does that guy not have a job? Like, he should have a job. I can think of many things for him to do. Like, why isn't somebody paying him to do that, right? So, you're not aware of like economics and all these structural issues, all this sort of societal issues, all this sort of stuff back then. You're just kind of like, hey, like, it just seems like there's a ton of shit for humanity to do. And yet people sitting around doing nothing, right? Like what's going on here? Like something's wrong. So I still kind of feel that way. It's not that everybody has the same level of productivity, but everybody has something they can produce. Why, if you're like the king or the emperor of humankind, and you're like trying to extract the maximum. Okay, I have 8 billion people underneath me. I'm trying to extract maximum value. Like, you will find a way to like put every single person to work, right? Regardless of skill level, regardless of education, all this sort of stuff. Like, there's things to do. On technology side, yeah, technology should be a lot further along than it is. And in general, I feel that about science. Like, why is medicine in 2020 or 2023 now? Why is it at where it's at now? Like, why isn't it 100 years faster? Why don't we have the technology that we're going to have in 21, 23? Why don't we have that today? The rate of progress to me seems very suboptimal. Why aren't we on Mars? Elon's launching these rockets and they can land themselves and all this fancy shit. But why aren't we on Mars? Why is this stuff so slow? So there has to be some reasons to that as well. And I always felt like probably the biggest difference that somebody could make in the world is to speed all this shit up. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what the answer is there yet. The rate of human progress, I guess maybe you could even think maybe it's exponential or something. It still seems extremely slow to me.
What's slowing things down?
Just inefficiency. Like, there's just a lot of people doing shit that doesn't matter instead of doing stuff that does matter.
Why are people doing stuff that doesn't matter?
Structural reasons, misallocation of resources. Google makes a ton of money from ads. That's almost where they make almost all their money, right? From ads. And so they're sitting on a big pot of money and they hire a ton of smart people. And those smart people, majority of those smart people aren't doing something that's really that useful. Without getting into politics or any of that sort of thing, like, it's suboptimal, right? Like, why doesn't Google take that X number of $1 billion it makes a year that it's spending on all these people that are just sitting around doing nothing useful and do something useful?
Someone said this. I was out to dinner a couple of weeks ago. A couple of my colleagues, friends, they're in tech, and they were like, dude, middle management is very, like, I'm conflicted because my dad was in middle management, but he worked his way up. But most middle management doesn't want to hire someone smarter than them because then their job is threatened. So they want to almost maintain homeostasis and just keep status quo. And so they're not really doing innovative things necessary to keep the machine running in a way, right? To like make sure they can get their bills paid, and like, which I get, it's important. That's often when innovation starts to stagnate, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently as well. People are really risk adverse. Like, the curve of risk adverse, like, I understand why people are risk adverse. Okay, you have kids, you got to feed them. There's all sorts of things reasons people are risk averse, but like the curve of what that is should be like shifted. Like it doesn't make sense where it's at. I think that's part of like the middle management thing. Like you should try to push. People should be rewarded for taking risks, and people should be rewarded for pushing the envelope of things, even if it's short term against their personal interests. But yeah, I think this I don't know. There's a lot of sociological, psychological sort of issues here. You're promoted. The old saying is you're promoted to your level of competence. Like why didn't we keep you into something that you're competent at? That sort of thing, right? Like isn't that far better off? So these corporate structures are, again, it's another structural issue. They're just super inefficient. And people always thought that your career progress was always managing people, right? Like you move up through the ranks, it's a pyramid. Your pyramid keeps getting bigger, and everyone looks at you and they're like, oh my God, like all these people report to you now. You must be doing really well. And that's not necessarily the case at all, right? And there's hidden risks there too. Like companies definitely, with time realized that you're not adding that much value. I think Facebook is like, I think there was an article recently, like Facebook, like an engineer from like Zuckerberg was like 15 to 20 like levels, right? And Facebook's saying, we're going to cut out that. We're going to make it 5 levels. There's risk to being in the center, but people don't understand that risk. And I think like if you're a middle level manager, you get laid off. Companies typically don't hire middle level managers. Like they're promoted from within. So you see like on the job applicants, you see a lot of people that were managers. Now they're saying, oh, but I can be an individual contributor. Again, I can go back to that. Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't. Like if you haven't been writing code for 5 or 10 years, you're out of the loop, right? If you haven't been designing cars for 5 or 10 years, or whatever the company is doing, you're a lot of risk. So I don't know. I think even if you're managing people, yeah, you should just try to hire smarter people than yourself. Stop trying to move up. Don't worry about that. Like the guy that gets promoted that doesn't want to be promoted is probably the best guy to promote, right? It's like the guy who doesn't want the job is probably the best guy that's going to be good at that job. But always keep your hands in the pot. Keep your understanding technical stuff. That's what I like about finance industry, right? Especially like HFT, super efficient, super flat structure. There's not, when I worked at Jump, there wasn't 10 levels between me and the owner of Jump. Everybody's doing something that's productive.
I was literally about to ask you that. Like, thank you for bringing that up. Where have you seen in industry? I mean, you've worked at large banks as well, right? You've worked within big
Wells Fargo, Goldman, JP.
Where have you seen, if you were to pull from the positives, accounts of your stories there, where have you seen proper risk management and proper management of highly valued assets, right? Like that came out weird. What I mean to say is, I don't know, what do companies call their high performers? Where have you seen the proper management of that?
I think Goldman is probably the best well-run large company I've ever seen. Like them compared, like JP Morgan was just a nightmare. Like they just so disorganized, at least while I was there. But there's some background to that. They had merged with, I think, Bear Stearns during the financial crisis. So there's a bunch of turmoil and stuff there. So maybe it's not a totally fair characterization, but Goldman is an amazing place just because the culture is so strong. It's a culture of like almost like academic excellence, right? Like people are really interested in the truth. I never worked at like Bridgewater. Bridgewater, I think, is also known for this, but almost to a like sadistic sort of masochistic sort of way. But yeah, it's amazing to have like 30,000 people that have all very similar culture kind of aligned. Like that's just a feat in and of itself. So I think they were pretty good at like recognizing individual contributors and that sort of thing. And they were the first place also I saw where they had a management track and they had a technical track, and it was like a and so they really had a way for people to like grow in their careers without getting people underneath them. And that takes all that pressure off promoting people to their level of competence, right? Where they keep doing what they're doing, but they keep maybe having more responsibility. So maybe, like I'm building one system, but now at a higher level, I'm an architect, I'm building 3 systems or something like that, but I'm not managing people. So I think that's like a really, really good program. I don't know if other companies have that. Maybe they probably do. I think I've heard that some other companies do have that, but yeah, Goldman was just a really, on a big company side of things. On a small company like HFT is just very efficient. And that's why people are paid so well in these sort of industries as well, because they're efficient. You're not paying this tax like to the manager above you makes 10% more than you, or or 20% more than you, and then his manager makes 20% more than him, or you get this tax, and then you have this like tax structure, so you're paying taxes. That's basically like the government, right? Like all these layers of management, all the way to the CEO, are like government, and you have to pay taxes to all this government. And so when it comes time to pay you as on the bottom level, or on the near the bottom level, it's like your income's not that as good as it could be. If you cut all of that, okay, there's more money to go. There's the same amount of money to go around to less people. That's the reason those industries pay so well. So they're just very efficient in their use of resources, use of people, use of everything. So
I never thought of it as efficiency. That's very insightful. Even the way that I like do coaching and therapy with my clients, man, I'm all about efficiency. And I don't stress that enough, right? In my own marketing or whatever, that like it is a path of efficiency. So I don't know. I mean, there's that clicks for me like significantly, because it's amazing what the converse of that is when we're doing things we don't want to be doing. And like we all had jobs we didn't love, or I'll just go personal, like Asian culture, right? We're so focused on either becoming an engineer, doctor, or lawyer. We waste a lot of energy, expend a lot of energy. That's not an efficient process. There's nothing efficient about having a doctor, a lawyer, or a whatever, like who actually it's not their passion, who doesn't love it, who wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night excited to do that work, And so like, I do think it's a privilege and a blessing to have found our passions in that way, right? Like I also do, as you know, I do some investing as well. And in this crypto market, like, and like my buddy from the Midwest yesterday, who I give so much credit to, like I wouldn't have graduated with a chemistry degree without him at Northwestern. And he asked me last night, he was like, what's harder, like doing therapy work or investing? Yesterday, I was also going through a project that I invested pretty heavily in, had a lot of their dirty laundry aired out. So I was just like going through the data and trying to figure out what was happening. And I was like, dude, therapy's so easy in comparison to like investing. And that's just because that's something I love doing. I get in the zone when I'm with my clients, I compile the information they give me almost instantaneously. Yeah, man, it feels like Michael Phelps in water, or whatever analogy you want to give. It's just comes to me naturally. It doesn't even seem hard to me. And I agree with what you're saying, that a lot of people that are in power are there for the wrong reasons, which makes me really excited about. I'll give a little plug here that like, this is part of my passion. When you see your FTXs happen and an X number of other rug pulls, right? This is just my experience, right? I deep down believe the difference I want to make in the world is, what if I could meet those entrepreneurs earlier in life, right? And start working with them earlier on in their journey, so that like if they have those few decisions where like greed can kick in, that they make the right decisions, and that's part of my passion. And so like,
let me ask you this though. Sorry to interrupt.
sure.
What if their business idea cannot succeed without the fraud of the cheating? Like what if the whole success is predicated on, okay? That's the way I kind of feel. Like it's not necessarily the case that a lot of these would have been successful and then they went above that and tried to cheat. They would have never been successful had they not cheated. Like cheating was an ingredient to the success, to the temporary success, a necessary step.
Granted, right? Fake it till you make it.
You fake it till you make it, but fundamentally, mathematically, economically, it'll never make it. So, you're faking it until you're failing. Basically, you're faking it until the failure. You're faking it until you're exposed. I think that's one of the problems in like crypto spaces. It's not fake it till you make it. Like it's fake it until the fraud is found. That sort of thing. Like, what's that woman that was making the tests that were like in Walgreens and stuff?
Yeah,
Theranos or whatever it is. I can't remember the name.
Elizabeth Holmes,
right? Like it was. She was faking it until she make it. The problem is there was no making. Like there was no roadmap to success, at least in a short enough time frame that she could fake it.
I think a difference can be made, even with most people in that situation. When people are sociopaths, I think Elizabeth Holmes definitely was. I'd put in that direction, unfortunately, because I've met him. Yeah, man, I went rock climbing with him in 2018. Right when he was leaving Jane Street. He told me that he didn't feel emotions. So I was like, okay. So I kind of picked up on that as like, maybe say it again.
Was he on meth then?
No. He wasn't yet. I can't say he was or wasn't, but I don't think he had enough pressure to have to be on there yet.
That's what speed does to you. It actually removes your emotions, right? Like the Germans, like in World War II, they were all high on meth. Part of meth is it removes your emotions, like Adderall, these sorts of any of these, like what are the stimulants, right?
Yeah.
Like yeah, they give you more energy, but they also remove your like your emotions. So you become like sociopathic on at certain doses. You become like sociopathic.
You do. And I think even in those moments, I've been on Adderall for like years, and I keep cutting back as much as I can. This kind of goes back into my own trauma of like trying to be productive by society standards versus like what I wanted to do. You're right. Like those are the facts, but there's got to be a moral element to it, right? Like, for example, I think your mom must have done a really good job raising you to the extent that like we all like pushing boundaries and being at the bleeding edge as much as we can. But at some point, I'm gonna go with this. This is something my dad taught me, right? I was a sales guy most of my life. My dad said, okay, and he kind of is more of like he's an accountant, but he has an engineering mindset, right? Listen, man, you have the gift of the gab. A part of your job is bullshitting people, granted. Be careful with that though, because there's a line. And you'll get yourself in trouble once you start believing in your own bullshit. And that is what I'm referring to, is that awareness of knowing like, okay, fine. Part of this might be around fraud just to see if I can get to this level. But there's also this decision that can be made. I don't know, whatever. I've raised $5 million, right, for my protocol or bridge or whatever. I don't think I'm the guy to take this forward. And there's this critical decision to be like, do I just rug? Do I use the backdoor, whatever, entrance into the bugs I know that exist? Just steal the money anonymously and run around hiding the rest of my life, or fucking do it again a few times like some serial entrepreneurs do, or whatever fraudsters do? Or do I like reflect, chill, have awareness for like, maybe this isn't going to be a benefit to the world. Maybe this isn't an efficient system, right? Maybe it actually can do more damage than whatever minor gains I would get from that, right? And if I can stop 1 out of 10, that's fucking success to me. And I don't know what the actual numbers would end up being, but I think I have that. I think I have that capability, right, to make that impact. And so I'm not going to catch them all. That's impossible. And that perfection thing is like kind of like getting 100 on an exam in school. It's like, fuck that. That's not even that's not where the alpha is, right? I'm trying to be perfect. It's actually about just finding out where I can make a difference with people. And like, I know I'm pretty good. So I'd like to fail at doing that. And I'd still consider that a success.
I mean, if you can raise $5 million, like you said, you have some level of talent, right? There's something that's good about you. Not everybody's getting $5 million. If execution is your problem, take that $5 million and bring in people to help you execute. Or why don't you take a long-term view? You're better off trying. Like if you make a valid, legitimate effort to building something and you fail, yeah, those people are going to be upset they lost their $5 million, but they're going to be a lot less upset than they would be if they just disappeared, right? Like the one's a scam and one's an attempt and miss sort of thing situation. So is it easy money? Like they're afraid that they're insecure and they can never replicate that sort of thing again. Is that there's some underlying like psychological sort of
For sure. 100%, man. Like imposter syndrome, right? Like of not believing that you belong there in the first place, or that actually seems like a healthier thing. I think it's having that 16-year-old, that all of us had, ego of believing you can do it without understanding what it takes. And then I think there's also an element of humility that comes into play, and social skills, right? The humility of being like, I didn't realize all the things that I had to do. Now that I'm here, am I going to address this, or am I just going to keep pretending like it doesn't exist? And then the second thing is asking for help. So many people struggle with just asking for help. Like with my clients, just to bring it up without giving any specifics, I tend to vibe with people that don't know how to ask for help, and they're like hyper independent. And a lot of my sessions is about demonstrating the efficiency gains that can come from just asking for help that people don't even realize they can do, right? Because when we're all in our own minds, and we are becoming more and more socially isolated in a way, right? To the extent that the media we're watching is even like, you could even call it like a magnifying effect of our own thoughts to begin with, right? It helps to have like a healthy dose of skepticism is the right word, but why is this the way I'm thinking? Is there another way to see this? Is another lens that I could see this from, right? Benefit coaching or therapy could provide to like all these people on what is that terrible forum that like memes are created on? Have you heard of 4chan? Don't ever go there. Well, you're probably gonna go there. Literally, like it's like where the underground trolls, where like your not to get political, but a lot of those attacks that happened when Trump was in office, there's like the brothers or the boys club or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. So there's a lot of like weird underground trolls that don't get, they like live in their parents' basement and like don't have, you know what I mean? Like they don't have a lot of social activity, and I have empathy for that. I don't know if I had enough social exposure growing up myself, right? So like I have empathy for that, but a lot of that just comes from like socialization too, right? Like in I think Sweden or Norway, up until like grade 5, education is just going outdoors, go outside and play in the woods, right? Just think of how many skills you learn by playing
Mhm.
outdoors with your classmates, right? Those social skills first in terms of its importance, those social skills are so important to like doing well in any type of a team dynamic, right? You're really learning a lot of team building skills, how to take charge, how to lead, how to climb up the tree, what plants to stay away from, like protecting each other. Like there's a lot of like benefits from that. And I think the more that we become socially isolated, which one might argue Sam Bankman-Fried definitely was, right? Like he was, from what I've read, he was raised around all like these college professors who are always talking about effective altruism or something. His mom wrote the book on ethics at Stanford. She's not teaching it, she wrote it.
Uh-huh.
Stanford Law. When you're surrounded by that and all the dinner parties that they throw all the time, where's your playtime, right? Where are you growing as a kid?
Probably treat it more than as like ethics at that point probably becomes more of an academic topic, right? And it's like
Right.
it's
Yes.
not something you internalize like I'm a human being, I should do this way. It's more like, oh, here's I'm going to discuss it in an academic sense. Here's if we do it this way, it has this result. If we do it that way, it has this other result. It probably desensitizes you when you discuss it.
We refer to this as spiritual bypassing or intellectual bypassing, right? In therapy, it's spiritual bypassing, and PhD programs or something. I'm sure it's intellectual bypassing, right? Like sometimes theory gets to the point that only other theorists understand what the fuck the paper even says, right? Like until there's actual like application of it and experiential of it. I mean, if I were to like come up with a crazy theory, I might even say like maybe SBF was just annoyed of all the ethics being thrown at him and he wanted to push the limits of it. And like maybe that's where a complex came up for him. Yeah, I agree, man. Like theory has a place in the world, but like, I don't know, man, until rubber hits the road, like it doesn't really mean.
I kind of had another theory about him as well. I haven't thought about it recently, but it's kind of self-sabotage, right? Like he couldn't deal with it, so the way of saving himself was to blow it up. It's almost like a subconscious sort of thing. You do a behavior that logically, if you like consciously, logically, rationally thought about it, you would not do the behavior, but you do it anyways because deep down inside of your subconscious, it's the only way of like sort of saving yourself, whatever saving yourself may be. I just felt like I honestly did. I never used FTX. I never had money on FTX. I never followed FTX. To me, I never even thought about FTX really, or Alameda, or SBF or any of this stuff. But this was just when I was kind of watching the videos and how he just progressively got worse and worse. He's like literally like shaking on national TV interviews. Like, doesn't somebody come to him and say like, "Dude, you're shaking on TV. Like, stop shaking." Like, if it's just progressively getting worse, that almost like a way of sort of saving himself is to subconsciously is to sabotage the whole thing, kind of blow it all up.
He cultivated such a great rhetoric and a public opinion about himself, that like he had done such a great job of cultivating that image for himself that like he could almost go on stage without a shirt on and no one would care. That's why he was able to get away with that shaking thing. And this is very interesting. This whole like wanting to just nuke the plan because he knew that he couldn't handle it anymore. So here's my point, man. This gets right back to what I was saying. Imagine if that dude just learned earlier on that it's okay to fucking ask for help. Ask for help,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, you're right.
You know what I mean? Like that's it. It's all you got to do. Ask for help. Go to mom and dad. Go to the regulators. Go to fucking CZ, right? Instead of shit talking him. Vulnerability. Like doesn't have to be public. No one has to know about it. You can still maintain your image behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's ego and insecurity, and I think another thing I used to mention in terms of just like hiring and stuff, it's like different people are perform well under different circumstances, or different roles, or different situations. If I don't want to hire you, it doesn't mean that I think you're bad or you're low performing or something like that. It just means like you're not, like maybe you're a square and I need a circle right now, right? Like it doesn't mean that you're small or you're worse or anything else. Like if I need a square, I'd hire you. It's like, Google was basically run by, was like a Eric Schmidt or something. Like it wasn't run by, it wasn't like, the founders of Google recognized early on, or their VCs or investors, or somebody told them, right, like you guys cannot run this company indefinitely. Like you need to bring on like real management. So there's different people for different phases of companies, right? Like startup guy cannot be not always be the CEO. Like the startup guy has a different mentality. So there is a scenario in which FTX and that stuff would have been successful and he could have continued to play a role, but it was run in a more serious, rigorous manner by somebody else. I think that sort of behavior is like ego and insecurity and those things are all like intertwined, right? Like people that are often like very aggressive are actually the ones that are most insecure, out of insecurity. So their aggression is out of insecurity. It's not like they're people who appear to have like big egos are actually the ones that have really terrible egos. Like they're actually deep down inside like really insecure. It's like buying a big truck, right? Like all these sorts of comments. Like the guy rolls up in his big. Nowadays, people say that it's like, oh, he must have like a low self-esteem or something. He had to buy a big truck. That's sort of more commentary than that, but yeah.
No, 100%. I completely agree. And in that case, right? In Google's case, Bill Campbell's that's because of Bill Campbell. He was, I just looked it up. So he has this book out called the $1 Trillion Coach. So he helped to build some of Silicon Valley's greatest companies, including Google, Apple, and Intuit. And that's kind of what I aspire to be in a way, right? Of like early on, that's it, man. Just like, yeah, that's it. It's motivational for me to hear that that's possible because I believe it is. I have a lot to learn still, but I believe that is possible, So I'd ask for you, if you find people early on that you sense like both have they're willing to like swallow their pride, look for help as well, right? Usually aren't those people who are like boasting, or maybe those are the guys that need help but aren't willing to admit it. Send them to me. I would love to learn from them and contribute to them and their cultures. I just wanted to say that plug for my own self-confidence, purposes before I pivoted away. Yeah, because I'm passionate about that and I'm pretty efficient at it. Back to Monad, right? Why do we need another layer 1 EVM compatible blockchain when there's so many scammers out there already? At 45, you left, I'm not calling you a scammer, I'm referring to the industry. When at 45, you've seen so many scams and you had a comfy well-paying job. But let's go back to all your family members laughing. Oh God, James isn't serious about this. He's just, doing this whole, let's go try launching my own company thing. $90 million later in your face. But that's one positive metric along the path, right, of a long-term goal. But yeah, why what motivated you to do that?
Well, there's some orthogonal things here. As to like the question of why leave Jump, or like HFT is just a long grind. Like it's just constant grinding, and there's no secure, with the exception of some teams, some firms, there's no secure like position, right? Like there are some people who dominate certain trades or certain markets, but that's kind of a rare case. And even then people are all kind of on their heels. So it's like my grandfather mowing his lawn. Like he goes out and he trims it and it looks beautiful and perfect. And 3 days later, it's already starting to unravel. And a week later, he needs to do it all over again, right? So it's a never ending grind. And 2014 to 2022. So 8 years, just literally like a couple weeks short of 8 years. So, we had some success. It's just time to do something new after grinding on the same problem for such a long time. So that's why it was, I don't know what terminology to use, but kind of a low barrier to leaving. Like why I was super apprehensive about leaving. It's just like I'd done that, and I may go back to trading someday or do some trading or something like that. Trading on blockchain probably actually seems a lot more interesting, like building an actual full order book exchange, or at least helping build that or seeing that manifest itself. And there's some products out there that are okay. I've used a couple of them on blockchain, but they're really not scalable. yet. So there's still a lot of work there to do. That's still very interesting. That's kind of like a place that we can combine our HFT, financial markets, exchange sort of knowledge in with blockchain. So why EVM? Well, as you know, I was the maintainer of Pith for a short time. I don't know, 6 months or something. I forget how long I was on. Things seemed harder than they had to be. Things seemed more complex. They actually weren't performant. At least I like to think of myself as like an academic, sort of rigorous guy. If somebody claims something, I want to see like the research, right? Like I see this on Twitter all the time. You know, it's like there's a post and somebody's like, well, 15 million people do this. And they just post that on Twitter. Put a link there. Prove it. Like where do you come up with this number, right? And actually, if you dig like 90% of the time, the numbers bullshit or it's taken out of context or something like that, right? It's like, okay, yeah, 15 million number is real, but it only applies in these cases, you know, and they're generalizing it. So there's all sorts of just like general dishonesty, and I think in society nowadays. I don't know. Maybe when I was a kid it was different. Maybe I just wasn't aware and it was always there. But I just look around. It's like everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's talking about different things, and you know they've made up their mind, and now they're just trying to find evidence to support it. I saw a lot of that in crypto space as well. People quoting numbers that are just bullshit numbers. If you actually go and look, like a number isn't a number until you can replicate it. You know, there's this thing in like science, right, where like people publish a paper and then some other team at a different university tries to replicate the paper and it's unreplicable, right? Like they can't replicate the results. And it turns out that paper was total bullshit. Like, you know, and maybe not total bullshit, but enough bullshit that they shouldn't have published the paper. It's in crypto space. I think, you know, I lived through the late 90s. I was in high school and college. I saw like, okay, you know, like you run this little pet store, you get pets.com domain name, you throw .com on it, but you can raise $100 million, right? So that same sort of thing in crypto is like, it's immediately going to attract easy money. And if the easy money is all you got to do is throw up a website, say, oh, we can do 50,000 transactions per second or something like this, right? Or you publish some new consensus algo that really isn't that much different than the other ones, or maybe it's different, but it doesn't really make a big, maybe it's different theoretically, but in practice, it doesn't make a difference. These sorts of things. So you see this stuff, and yeah, when I just, you know, we moved over to our trading team. Moved over to Jump Crypto in 2021, and that's when I traded crypto back in like 2017. I kind of followed Bitcoin back even before then. Never really didn't really buy any, kind of messed around. It was always kind of just very light interest. But when I actually started in the space at Jump Crypto, I started actually like reading papers and stuff, and you can just read a paper and just intuitively kind of go like, this is bullshit. Like that's not the case for all of crypto. Like I think, like I mentioned before, Zcape stuff is very interesting, right? That's very interesting stuff. There is some innovative stuff happening in crypto, but in a lot of spaces, it's a lot of times, in a lot of cases, it's not. It's just baloney, and like people are just literally making shit up. And the people that are consuming that information, in most cases, are not really capable of deciding whether that's accurate or truthful or anything like that. They just consume it. And I felt that there was, you know, HFT. We were down in on Intel CPU. We were down in hundreds of nanoseconds. You know, low single digit hundreds of nanoseconds. Going even lower than that on like ASICs and other stuff. So I kind of just, you know, HFT, we kind of intuitively know I want to run like a 2-layer neural network and predict the price movement. And I got model logic, trader logic, risk logic, and I know it's going to take this long. And if it takes longer than that, I intuitively know something's wrong. Just from writing highly optimized code over the years, and just there's actual work that can be done here. I think, like Keone mentioned in one of the recent Twitter spaces or something, it's like it's more about implementation than it is, or he called it execution, but we don't mean like transaction execution. We mean like human execution of the right? It's more about execution, implementation, quality of implementation. It really is going to lead to like high performing systems. I made a consensus algorithm. Like that's just not the difference, right? It's not the one that recently people keep talking about DAG consensus algorithm, DAG execution, all this. There's nothing special about that. Like it helps them raise funds. It helps them get people excited in the project. It helps them do a lot of things. Maybe they do take that money and then like that $5 million guy, they take that money and they actually hire, you know, good engineers and good mathematicians and good CS people and good protocol researchers, and maybe they actually do produce something that's that's good and going to have lasting effect. But I think in a lot of cases, so yeah, I just saw that and I'm like, okay, we can actually build a real product and do a really good job. And we can be like a real company and a real technology company. And really, I feel also, like I said, we could bring a lot of academic rigor to this. Like if you can't go to GitHub and say git clone, blah, 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 make, build, make, run, test, and get the numbers that are published in the website, then those numbers are fake, right? Like if you can't easily, obviously you have to the same hardware that they have, but people should specify. I have this Intel CPU. I had this much RAM. I was running Linux distro this. I had this, blah, blah, blah. If you can replicate that environment and then clone that repo and hit make run, make test, benchmark or whatever, and it spits out the same number that they publish on their website, that's a real number. If you can't do that, it's not a real number. Somebody pulled that number out of their ass.
Yeah.
And there's just so much dishonesty. And so, one of the things I want to do is not just build Monad, but I want to bring like more rigor to this, like benchmarking, this sort of metrics. And everything's a trade-off. So it's not always going to be the case. You can say blockchain A is better than blockchain B. It's blockchain A is better in this circumstances. Blockchain B is better in these circumstances. It's not like a linear performance like line, right? So there's cases where you're going to make trade-offs. I'm going to only allow certain sorts of transactions, certain sorts of behavior, but I can achieve double the throughput. If I make that restriction, I can achieve double the throughput of transactions. That's blockchain B. Blockchain A, they're a general blockchain. Like they're not putting those restrictions on the developers or putting those restrictions on the users. So they can only achieve X TPS, right? So I think there's also like this, I'm trying to win. Like I'm the best blockchain. Well, there's not going to be a best blockchain, right? Everything has trade-offs. So like with Ethereum, at least one of the main benefits of Ethereum in my mind is like economic security, right? Like Ethereum has a lot of economic security. If you had $1 billion, you'd probably be okay with putting on Ethereum. You may not, some of these other random blockchains, you may not want to put your $1 billion, of stable coin on those blockchains because they don't know that they have that economic security, right? So, but that doesn't make them worthless either. Like maybe they have some other benefit. Maybe they're good for gaming, where you might lose a couple $100 of gaming assets or time, the equivalent of time. Gaming. So, but yeah, we just need to bring that sort of like, this is the benchmark and it should be open and everybody can replicate it. And I'm going to run this benchmark and okay, chain A performs this well, chain B, and then if it's open, chain A can come in and say, hey, you didn't benchmark our chain properly. And then it's an open discussion. So a lot of transparency, a lot of like honesty, a lot of rigor, I think would really benefit the industry as a whole. Because all the other bullshitting, marketing, deception, fake numbers, this is all distraction. We're talking about efficiency. This is huge inefficiency in crypto space for the industry itself as a whole.
What gives Ethereum economic security from a numbers perspective? Is it the fact that proof of stake has been implemented, and so there's a security that comes with that model where, if all of a sudden the 50% of the network decided to unstake, is it because of the large funds that own Ethereum positions? Is it because it's now regulatory clearance? Like what about it gives it?
Yeah, all the above. There's a lot of attention. There's a lot of attention just to the code, the space, to the research, the economic security, like you mentioned, the big stakes. Yeah, it has that. I don't know what's currently staked on Ethereum, but $1 billion relative to that is a lot better number than $1 billion relative to any of the other chains below it. There's a certain security of putting your money where other people have already put their, and where people are all incentivized to cooperate in a way.
I just thought of a fun segment, James Bullshit Meter. So if I were to name a bunch of blockchains, could you kind of spitball?
Yeah, but I don't want to be negative. I don't know. The proof is in the pudding. Like I saw this presentation with Warren Buffett, and he showed like the 25 top companies in their industries, or in some certain industries or something, in like some year, and then he shows like 20 years later, maybe it was the top 50 companies or something like this, and like almost none of them existed anymore or were not top. Right? Like we can talk about specific blockchains. My estimate to you is that 95% of them won't be around in 5 years anyways. So it's kind of a waste talking.
Why will Monad be around?
Well, I think we're serious, right? We're actually trying to make a real company and a real platform So, I think in the crypto industry, people are too worried about blockchain A and blockchain B. Centralization is really centralized. Imagine if Amazon announced tomorrow that you can deploy on Amazon chain, but it's not a chain, right? It's all centralized. You can deploy any app you want, and they will make certain guarantees. There's certain guarantees they won't make, and that would attract potentially a lot of developer mind share. The composability aspect is a great thing about blockchain. I can compose these apps. You can compose on AWS, but it's very limited. Like there's very specific apps or very specific services they provide. You can't compose. You can't build an exchange and then somebody builds a lending protocol and you compose it on AWS. Like that sort of thing doesn't, or at least you could probably do it, but it would not be very clean, not very elegant, it'd just be weird, right? So, but if they went that direction, they could. So I think as an industry, we just need to get serious about real apps that real people want to use, and where decentralization, all the benefits of decentralization, composability, like actually make a competitive advantage to that app as opposed to a centralized version of it. The thing it annoys me, like money transfer. Like I have Zelle, I have PayPal, I have Venmo. I think Venmo's owned by PayPal or something like that.
Mhm.
I don't have Cash App. Some people use Cash App. Like I do money transfers all the time, instantaneous. It goes directly into their account, no fee. It's free.
Yeah.
Like it costs me nothing. It's already on my phone. It's integrated with my bank account. Like what did this payment thing solve? And then somebody will be like, oh well, I tried to transfer $150,000 to my parents in India, and it took 3 days. I'm like, okay, that sucks, but how often are you transferring $150,000 to your parents in India? Like, are you doing this weekly? Because you probably have a lot of money. Like it's not a real problem for you, like, right? So it's like, I don't know. The payments thing is not, at least for US people, or like, I understand now there's a totally different thing. I think we talked about this before, like in Africa, where the payments are actually like integrated with the phones because they don't even have smartphones, right? So they're like texting. I don't fully understand, but they're like texting something to the telecom company that then somehow transfers money to the other person. So those are, I think, in like those sort of cases, in the case of like money transfers for the average U.S. citizen, you're really not. It's not going to be Phantom competing with Solana. It's going to be blockchain competing with Zelle, PayPal, Venmo, right? It's competing with centralized services. So to argue whether it's going to be Solana or Phantom seems kind of like, or some other blockchain, just pick two random blockchains out of my head. But to argue that sort of thing just seems like a kind of almost like a waste of time to me, because it's not.
So you think, so we're at the same time, we're also looking for what those applications will be, right? Because like, I agree that remittance right now is kind of the number one use case, I think, right? I think Ripple's doing a lot of transactions. I don't know anyone who actually uses it, but for like for like normal remittance, right? I do see the value of that. Let's say your parents are in a bind back in India and you need to like send them money immediately, right? Or some people's like cleaners send their money back to the Philippines or something, right? Like on every 2 weeks, having 3 extra days to have food whenever you get your paycheck. I can see the benefit of that, right?
Well, I was talking about wire transfers though, right? Like you still have Western Union. Like the fees are high, but you still have Western. There's still instantaneous transfer.
They are, but if you're only sending $20, $100, that would be expensive, right?
No, but you're sending it as a U.S. person. Yeah, you may send $20 and it may cost you $8 union fees, but your income level is probably still high enough that you really don't give a shit, right? Like
Depends.
you don't buy a McDonald's Big Mac tomorrow instead. Like it's not like you're not paying like a car payment worth of fees. Like you're paying a fast food meal worth of fees, right?
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I see your point. What are going to be those killer vertical apps? Like, do you think it's gaming? Do you believe in gaming?
I think it will be some gaming. I think it will be DeFi. I think it'll be social network stuff, honestly.
Really?
I think there'll be a lot of social network stuff in there.
You think so? You think you believe in decentralized social?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I think there's plenty of stuff. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation that I can't even predict, because if I could predict it, I'd probably be involved in building it. So, my job with Monad is to build the platform that enables those app teams to build those innovative apps. That's kind of like I see my role. Like my specialty is high performance computing, and my job is to let somebody else who has an idea for an app, scale that app and be able to build it. Because right now they can't build it. Like the limitation on not only on the throughput, but just on the expressibility. Like what can you express on chain? I think I've mentioned this to you before and other people. It's like, think of how many lines of code are in Microsoft Word, the most complex application on blockchain. Like these are orders of magnitude difference. And I'm not saying we need to build Microsoft Word on blockchain, but like we're still a long ways from building like real interesting apps. And I think if you tried to build them now, if you tried to build them on like Ethereum or something, of course you couldn't even run it because the gas cost plus the limitation, computability, and all this stuff. So
You've asked me in the past if they want to hear people building actual apps. I've invested in a project called Orbs, building essentially Twitter for Lens Protocol. Indian founder here in the Valley. I think you'll enjoy talking to him. I also did a podcast with him, so like I don't know. I think you'd enjoy talking to him. I think you'd appreciate like real applications that are being built on it, and they're running it off of Lens, which uses Matic, which uses Polygon, right? So that could be pretty interesting for you. Sorry, that was just I love making those connections. That gets me excited. Nilesh is, dude, he's like majored in computer science, didn't even know what computer science was. He didn't even have a computer, right? Like he literally, in his town that he comes from, like you'll appreciate each other. Like making $1 a day means you're killing it. And like and no one rose, not a lot of people rose above that, right, within his community. And he just kept pushing the limit. And he's a hustler, man. And he's building like ships. Like I saw Orbs one week. Imagine Twitter without photos and video. So I like uploaded my first podcast on it using like a different protocol because it's on Lens, right? So using a different app. You're aware of Lens, right?
I'm not aware of Lens.
Okay, sorry about that. So Lens protocol is building like it's by Stani, like from Aave. So it's essentially decentralized social media. So it gives you that entire protocol layer you need to own your own social media data, right? Your entire like history. So in order to even upload my video to Orbs, I have to use some other application, right? And 2 weeks later, he ships, boom, video, photos on it. Like he just ships, and so I'm really proud of the guy. So I just think you guys are really gonna get along, like vibe wise. I can sense it. Do you guys plan on doing any grants in Monad? I don't know if I know this may not be your department, but
yeah, I think we do. I think there's just a number of different things to help make an app team get started, successful, that sort of thing. I mean, definitely from my side, that's like a financial sort of thing, but from my side, I want to like closely collaborate with those app teams. I think it's not a reasonable expectation to say, hey, build an app and don't talk to me. Like, like here's the computer, don't call support. Like I just don't think that's a reasonable sort of thing. So I think I actually want to go completely the opposite direction. And, we can't necessarily do it for everybody who builds on ad, but for strategic,
no.
Work very closely with them, understand what they're doing and try to build things. Changes can be made to the platform itself to make those applications more efficient, more successful. But yeah, I just think of like Snapchat. Like if you ask me to invent Snapchat, there's just no way I could, because I'm old. I'd be like, Snapchat. I'm like, I don't want this app. Like who's gonna use this app? I can't imagine that. So, from my perspective, I'm more like the Android or the Apple, the Google or the Apple developer who's like building the platform, the app store and the runtime and the VM and all the stuff that the guy that builds Snapchat can build it on. That guy, I can be that guy. And we can, Monad can be that guy, but we can't necessarily be the guy that's going to build Snapchat. That's a different mentality. It takes a different sort of thinking. So I just think it's really hard to predict like what innovative apps are going to be out there. But I think right now people are super limited in what they can. We need to like really like expand the realm of possibility and then just open that up to people. They'll come with the ideas and then we'll help them execute.
I like it. No, I mean, okay, so pie in the sky. Sorry, I took the bait of social like early because I got excited about it. What just general, like pie in the sky, what based on what we know right now, what other industries do you think, or applications rather, are worthy of exploring?
Well, DeFi, right? But I think on that side, microfinance, all that sort of thing. We talked about some of that stuff before.
Oh.
There's a lot of business sort of stuff, government sort of stuff. I think there's just a lot of stuff that happens in businesses that people aren't even aware that happens, right? There's billion-dollar companies that consumers don't even know exist because only sell to businesses. So I imagine that if we can get some business-oriented, like business provider sort of app teams in here, that they can do something that's it's not even consumer sort of level. I think some blockchains have tried some of this stuff in the past. They've tried being like a business chain, right? They weren't trying to appeal to consumers. They were trying to appeal to like, businesses executing contracts back and forth on blockchain, or, making transfers back and forth on blockchain, inventory, this sort of thing. I think there's been some attempts at that, but probably not executed well. But yeah, I think B2B is a big place to be. It's really kind of just hard to speculate what's really possible, because people default to reimagining what already exists. And I think that's, Elon bought Twitter and everybody's like, okay, everybody go to, what is it, Mastodon or something?
Mastodon.
Yeah, it's just like, that's sort of a distributed, it's not, I don't know, it's not blockchain, right? It's not related to blockchain, but it's still a distributed sort of system where like nobody owns it and this sort of thing. The servers like peer-to-peer connect or something. There's something, I don't know, I know almost nothing about architecture, but it's kind of in the same spirit as like blockchain, decentralized sort of computation, that sort of thing. But yeah, those cases are there, but again, you're running up against centralized competition. Just kind of reimagining things is maybe not that interesting. So you either have to solve like a real problem. I see a lot of Twitter threads where they're like it's solving imaginary problems, or like, the magnitude of the problem is exaggerated. Like it's a real problem, but it affects like less than 1% of the United States population. Well, how are you going to onboard the next 200 million users when the problem you're solving only affects less than 1% of the population, which is like less than a couple million people, right? So you're not, like you have to have something that either really solves people's problem or enhances their life in some way. And I think there's just human ingenuity is going to come up with apps and new things that are going to happen. We just have to enable those people. I think I can imagine there's probably people who have apps and they look at like what's available and they go away from blockchain. They go to something else because they just don't see the execution being successful in blockchain.
Interesting. Yeah, man. No, that gave me another idea. B2B play that's already transacting billions of dollars. What would be your pitch for them evaluating Monad versus like one of these other L2s on Ethereum?
Well, I mean, why Monad versus an L2 is more general than even that. It's like the throughput's not there. Even with EIP 4844 or whatever it is, in the block space, you calculate like there's information sort of theory computation, and it's just not. Like you can't compress random numbers, right? Like a pure random number is not compressible. There's only so much, and L2s take these tactics. So like, okay, we have a very like small representation of a Uniswap. Yeah, we can cram a lot of those into our block space. Different things like that. But even if you add that all up and divide it by like what bandwidth is available, and I like to think more rather than like throughput and more like bandwidth, like what is the total data bytes put through our system rather than number of transactions. You can compress stuff, yeah, that doubles the number of transactions, but how much can you really process bandwidth wise? Like, so if you calculate all that, like the L2 still aren't going to be able to do that much transactions per second. And then then they start talking about like, okay, sharding on Ethereum, and they go to all this stuff. Well, anybody can shard. You can shard Solana, you can shard Phantom, you can shard Avalanche, you can shard Reddit. Anybody can shard. When you look at these technology things like sharding, app chains, side chains, all this L2s, these are all orthogonal to the L1. You can build an L2 on Solana. You can build an L2 on Ethereum. You can build an L2 on Avalanche, right? That's not an L2. The existence of an L2 is not a competitive advantage to the L1. So Ethereum having L2s is not a competitive advantage to Ethereum, right? Ethereum already has like its network effect. So that's where people want to build an L2. Why build an L2 on Solana when Solana's usage is actually less than what it's probably technically capable, right? So like what problem would you be solving there? You're not really solving a problem. From our perspective, like we want, we're targeting 100 megabit per second. It's like 12 megabytes per second, but there's overhead and stuff. So let's say 10 megabytes per second transaction. That's a lot of data. You can't pump that through the Ethereum network right now through Geth and all those components. They're just not performant enough.
Are there security drawbacks to doing that?
Definitely. Like, that's one reason we're targeting for decentralization. We're targeting like low end hardware. We're trying to make do as best we can with lower end hardware. We're not going the route of, okay, you got to rent a server in a data center, 10 gigabit per second connection, 256 gigabytes of RAM. Like that's server level hardware, right? That's enterprise level hardware. You don't go to Costco and buy a machine with 256 gigabytes of RAM. So yeah, like we're doing our best. We don't have the numbers yet, but we're doing our best to keep it as accessible as possible. People, I think like all this talk about decentralization of like, oh, we have 3,000 nodes. It's a little bit disingenuous because you have 3,000 nodes ran by rich people. Relatively rich people, right? Like The guy in Philippines is not paying $500 a month for. I think a lot of issues in society boil down to economic. The more accessible hardware is, price wise, the more decentralized the network is going to be. People say, okay, gigabit per second connection. Like, how many people have gigabit per second connection? You basically have to have like Verizon Fios, right?
Yeah, man.
So it's like, yeah, you can. How many billionaires in the world? 3,000 billionaires, five. I don't know how many billionaires there are.
Yeah,
Thousands, I think, probably.
sure.
So imagine you had a blockchain where the cost of running the node, you had to be a billionaire. And then you could go and say, oh, my Nakamoto coefficient is like whatever, right? Because I have 3,000 nodes running. That's because each billionaire is running a node. Would you call that a decentralized system? Like, it's not accessible to 99.999% of the people on the planet. So,
Wonder why scalability issues come up for that.
what's that?
I'm just kidding. I said, no wonder why scalability issues come up for that. Maybe you could argue it's decentralized, but it's certainly not scalable.
Yeah, it's decentralized if you're a billionaire.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you have to, I think a fair system, or I don't know what terminology you want to put, decentralized, fair, accessible, these terms, whatever you term, it comes down to economics. Like, it has to be accessible to everyday people before everyday people should trust it with whatever they have. Talking about, okay, economic security, like, most people don't have $1 billion. Most people have a few $100s. You always see these articles like 60% of the U.S. population can cover an unexpected $1,000 expense, right? Like, these sorts of things. Like, I don't know how real these numbers are, or where these numbers. I haven't seen the research where they come from, but most people are not dealing with vast sums of money. So blockchain has to be like accessible. It has to work for everybody.
Yeah,
otherwise, you're not going to get that uptake.
Exactly.
And if it's just run by, if it's all people making $50K a year, running off people's servers who make $300K a year, you might as well just treat it as like a centralized system, right? Like, what's the difference between them using an AWS instance, running on Amazon, versus them running on some rich club of people? It doesn't matter how many servers you throw at it; it's still run by rich people, right? So, from the perspective of the average median income person, it's still centralized. Like, if you go to some random guy who works, let's say a towing company, he's a tow truck driver, he makes $50K a year. To him, Solana is centralized. I'm not trying to pick on Solana here. It's just I'm picking a random name. Yeah. Solana is centralized to him. It doesn't matter that there's 3,000 servers running, because it's not accessible to him, right? Like, he cannot participate in the network in a meaningful way. He can be a user. And if he's going to be a user of that, he might as well be a user of Amazon or a user of Google Cloud or something like that. Like, what's the difference to him?
I can totally imagine. I mean, originally I was planning for this to be like a 60-minute podcast. I gotta say, this has been like my favorite podcast yet, because, like, I don't know, I appreciate you putting yourself out there more in terms of like just sharing more of your ideologies. And I think I want more people to see that. I want more people to know the people behind Monad, the people behind blockchain, the good people behind the scenes. So like I'm already thinking about what our next podcast could be. It could be about security and stuff, because based on my limited knowledge, I think that's a whole conversation for itself. Cool, maximize throughput. How do we get security on board too? So I'm like channeling all the security trolls out there, come at me, and then we can do another conversation about that. But overall, like, this was a ton of fun, man. Thank you so much for taking
it's been great. Yeah,
I would keep talking about it, but I have a client. And luckily, he said you can start 5 minutes late, so I'm not late for it. But yeah, man, no, this was amazing. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, and let's do it again soon.
100%, man. This is great. You're so authentic and very easy to talk to. So I'm excited to do this again. Maybe we'll aim for like in another 3 weeks or something after, maybe even give you a month, 4 to 6 weeks or something. We'll put something else up there, but some edited. But this is great. Thanks again, man. You're awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I'll talk to you later.
You too, man. Enjoy New York.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.